Hello everyone, it is that time again, the time that we search, analyze, and discuss philosophical elements within video games. Today's topic of choice, Persona 5. As I've described before, philosophy is the Greek word meaning love of wisdom. Within modern times, it involves speculation amongst metaphysics, ethics, and even religion. Today we'll be discussing parallels of these deep thinking topics within Persona 5. So without further ado, let's begin. Full disclosure, while I have played the original version of Persona 5, I will also be referencing events in Persona 5 Royal. There will be no spoiler warning, but if I decide to speak of an event that is in Royal but not in the original, or vice versa, I will point out such a distinction. For those of you that have no idea what I'm talking about, Persona 5 Royal is essentially an upgraded retelling of Persona 5. The overall narrative and plot of the game wasn't changed too drastically from the original, but there are some key notable differences that do actually matter and directly affect the plot, if that makes sense.
There's a little gray area in there, and that's where you operate.
Before we begin, I want to go ahead and give you all this for context. The Persona series is incredibly influenced by symbolism. Nearly every single thing that you will find in a Persona game is a representation of some idea or narrative, whether they be shot right in your face or hidden in the deep and darkest secrets. I will be addressing as many of them as possible. While symbolism is definitely different than core philosophical mechanics, the majority of them shown in this video will be most related to them. So without further ado, let's begin. Persona is a video game franchise that is well known for its characters, their relationships, and the dialogue that they share throughout the games. In each installment, all of the main characters of your party receive something called a persona. Within the video game series itself, a persona reflects the user's inner being, their desires, their personality. Basically, that whole spiel. Roughly, each important character that you will meet, whether they be in your party or not, will have one of the major Arcana cards. The Magician, the High Priestess, the Emperor, the Empress, the Hierophant, the Lovers, the Chariot, Justice, the Hermit, the Wheel of Fortune, Strength, the Hangman, Death, Temperance, the Devil, the Tower, the Star, the Moon, the Sun, Judgement, and the World. If you noticed, I left out the Fool. That is because you, the player character, possess that Arcana. Excluding you, the Arcanas are typically meant to relate to the person attached to them, and for those that have them, their personas reflect that Arcana as well. Now, there is a ton of history behind the major Arcana cards, and that is what we'll mostly be getting into for this video. So the major Arcanas were a select 22 cards out of a 78 tarot card deck, and they were used for games and gambling prior to the 17th century. The cards became a rather dominant pillar with esotericism, which was a practice to give a small group of people divine revelation. Esotericism is heavily related to Gnosticism, mysticism, alchemy, astrology, and more. It was actually heavily criticized by the Christian and Islamic communities as black magic. So now that we have the backstory of the Arcanas, let's see how they relate to the characters and personas attached to them. Starting with the Fool. As I said earlier, you, the player character, are the Fool. In the Persona series, typically every other Persona user will have a set persona. Now, as the story advances or you continue your relationship with those characters, their persona may end up evolving, kind of like Pokemon. Essentially, spending time with different people and helping them with their life-given situations will more than likely cause them to become mentally stronger. And since a persona is an inward reflection of a person, the persona itself would hence become stronger. This isn't necessarily true with the player character. Rather, the player character can capture and utilize nearly any persona. They are the Fool, the wild card, if you will. In tarot games, the Fool can actually be used several different ways. It can be used to essentially give its user an excuse from playing certain cards in different specific ways. The Fool, to my knowledge, is the only card like this, and because it can be used in such a wide variety of ways, be it good or bad, the player character can actually wield any persona. You are not set to any strict idea or personality trait and trope. What you do is your choice. This is true for just about every Persona game, to my knowledge. So I went to do some last minute research on the topic of the full Arcana within the Persona series, just to figure out if there's any extra stuff I could include in the video. Well, it turns out that Persona 3, 4, and 5's protagonists are the only 3 protagonists which use the full Arcana. The other 2 from Persona 1 and 2 use different Arcanas. I don't know what specific ones they are, but they're just not the full, so I'm an idiot. Now, in Persona 5 specifically, you lead a small group of other misfit teenagers called the Phantom Thieves. You are all considered the outcasts, or weirdos, to society. Conveniently enough, that's only true for about half of you, and the other half are just regular teenagers that got caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time. A major theme in Persona 5 is about breaking the constraints of society, specifically those in authority. You and your group are rogues, rebels, thieves. Out of every Persona game, literally being played as the Fool makes the most interesting case in Persona 5. The Fool stands out against them all as the irregular. It's also rather comical that your alias in the game is Joker. That's the point. Anyways, although that you can choose to wield any persona, the game does give you a canonical set persona named Arson. At the end of the game, Arson is given the opportunity of evolution, symbolizing your evolution as a character, evolution as the Fool. As coincidental as it may seem, Arson has many similarities to the fictional character Arsène Lupin. No, I'm just kidding. It's supposed to directly resemble Lupin. It's become tradition within the Persona series to mirror the Persona designs and characters themselves after famous historical or fictional figures, and Arson is no exception. Arson, as in the Persona, is in fact directly linked to Arsène Lupin, and hence, so are you. Lupin, like yourself, is a thief and master of disguise. It only makes sense that your persona would reflect that whole gentleman thief and rebel vibe concerning breaking the constraints of society. It's also interesting to note that the very first chapter within the Arsène Lupin novels involves Arsène getting arrested for the sake of saving a woman, which is nearly parallel of how the events in Persona 5 begins. While Arsène Lupin may be a perfect pick for the player character, what other historical or fictional character can we think of that resembles rebelliousness in its truest form? Oh, right, the devil. At the very end of the game, when you're challenging Yaldabaoth, who we'll get into at a later time, Arsène will break free from his chains, revealing his true form, Satan Nile. Within the game, Satan Nile is said to supposedly be the truest form of Satan himself before he fell from heaven. We all should know the story of Satan, right? Isaiah 14:12-15 states, "How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. How you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit." After all, who better to resemble all that is rebellious than Satan himself? Before we move on to our next Arcana, I would like to clarify that I will be discussing the Arcanas in order of how they're listed in the Tarot deck and not how they appear in-game. This means I will be going back and forth between different characters and different events that happen within the game rather than just a single straight line. This, more than likely, will get a little confusing, but I felt like it would be better for me personally, to tackle them all in a set, specific, strict order, rather than, just picking which characters to talk about in whatever order I choose, because, not every character is mandatory to form a relationship with. So, here we go. Moving on to the Magician Arcana. The Magician card has quite a few significant things about it. First off, it is the lowest ranking card out of the Arcanas aside from the Fool, however a lot of people don't count the Fool given its uniqueness. The Magician is also considered the sleight of hand card and a practitioner of stage magic, essentially not being a real magician. The Magician would use skills and talents to trick other people, like street magic. Some symbolism to note regarding the Magician Arcana is within the card artwork itself. In the Magician's right hand is a scroll, which is raised toward heaven, while his left hand is pointing towards the ground. This is supposed to symbolize the ability of the Magician to bridge the gap between heaven and earth, the natural and the supernatural. On the table before the Magician, we see the 4 tarot suits that resemble the 4 elements of the earth.
Water, earth, fire, air.
The Magician Arcana is also supposedly linked to the astrological lore tied to Mercury, but I couldn't exactly figure out how. So the character that we have affiliated with the Magician Arcana is Morgana. Morgana is an animated cat-like creature that you will find during the first dungeon of the game. Morgana shows you the ropes and how to utilize your persona. Morgana is very knowledgeable with stealth, how to remain stealthy, and all that jazz. Every now and then, Morgana will act a bit egotistical concerning his role on the team and will actually temporarily leave your party during one of the latter dungeons of the game because of his pride. Morgana's alias in the dungeons of the game is Mona. At first, I didn't think that, his name would have much significance, but it turns out that it does. The name Mona comes from Arabic origins, meaning wishes or desires. This name fits rather well for Morgana, given how fascinated Morgana is with not only human cognition and the subconscious, but the wishes and desires of corrupt humans as well. Morgana's persona is Zorro. That's right, Zorro from The Princess Bride. Oh, shoot, wrong movie. Zorro, in literary fiction, is a character who acts as a vigilante. He's rather similar to Robin Hood under the quota of defending the weak, and actually a lot of inspiration for Batman comes, from Zorro. I know that because I just started watching the Dark Knight trilogy. That actually doesn't have much to do with anything, I just wanted to mention that. Small fact, Zorro is actually Spanish for fox, which also goes into the whole sneaky Magician Arcana thing. So how does Morgana and Zorro relate to the Magician Arcana? Well, both of them are thieves. Both of them are required to perform sleight of hand tricks for their occupation. Morgana, however, can also be seen as the bridge for the player character to actually take their first step into the use of personas. Similarly to how the Magician bridges the gap between the natural and the supernatural, Morgana connects the player to the supernatural abilities that they have locked within themselves, and also how to navigate throughout their terrain. Next, we have the High Priestess. So before we get into the High Priestess Arcana, here's some small trivia concerning how this particular Arcana is shown within the Persona series. So originally, in fact, the High Priestess Arcana was called the Papus, or Popus, however you want to pronounce that, but it was changed, I'm not sure when. The Persona Wika, after all, can, only take me so far. But the original Arcana was actually called the Papus, or Popus, whatever, for a while, considering Pope Jean's whole Mulan act. So I assume it was changed, for the games, either shortly after the developers realized a change in real life, or, they just wanted to stick with the original name for a bit. The High Priestess Arcana in the Persona series is actually just called Priestess. So when I'm referring to the Confidant within the Persona series, I will be calling it Priestess. When I say High Priestess, I'm referring to the real, actual Arcana. As far as the lore goes concerning the High Priestess Arcana, the Priestess is actually identified with the Shekinah, which is a female dwelling in the presence of the divine. This is probably why we have the correlation with Pope Jean, who disguises herself as a man and is elected as Pope. In the card artwork, she is depicted having a lunar crescent at her feet and a horned, jeweled crown on her head with a globe in the middle. This crown is most likely a reference to the Egyptian goddess Hathor, who was the mother of both Horus and Ra, which would, kind of tie us back to the whole women dwelling with the divine gig. The scroll in the priestess's hand is also considered to be the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Meaty stuff! Within Persona 5, the Priestess Arcana is attached to the character Makoto Nijima and her persona Johanna, which is in fact a direct reference to Pope Jean. So I don't really have, to do much digging there. Out of your little band of misfits, Makoto really fits best as sort of like the mom of the group. She takes charge, makes rational decisions, all that jazz. Makoto has a very strong and dominant sense of justice, as is seen with her working with the principal of the school to try and expose your ragtag team for setting up Kamoshida, which is one of the previous villains, it's the first one, of Persona 5. Man, this story is like so interwoven, it's really hard to talk about things without getting in full context. Despite Makoto's seemingly go-getter attitude, she severely lacks in self-worth. She lives in her older sister's shadow and is manipulated as a pawn by the school principal. The student body also doesn't really care much for her, considering that she kept quiet about the gym teacher abusing other students. Right, that's another important story detail that we will get into later. It also should be noted that Makoto's codename is Queen, which alludes to the whole hierarchy thing that she's got going on with her persona. So how does Makoto relate to the Priestess Arcana, or specifically Johanna, aka Pope Jean? Well, we could make the correlation that Makoto, who is female, is dwelling amongst those with supernatural abilities like herself, similar to the Priestess. Maybe. I think that there might be some significance of Johanna being a bike in Persona 5. That seems really symbolic. I mean, I suppose it could just, be trying to resemble the rebellious nature of a biker. That kind of seems possible, but I'm not sure if that's set. Next up, for our fourth Arcana, we have the Empress. The iconology behind the Empress is rather fitting. The Empress sits on a throne wearing a starry crown, holding a scepter in one hand. Her throne is being found in a field of grain, which represents her dominion over growth. Her 12-starred crown seems to represent her dominance over the year, with each star either representing a month or one of the 12 zodiacs. The scepter seems to represent her power over life. Overall, the Empress embodies several things from both a physical and metaphysical context. Physically speaking, the Empress showcases relations of growth concerning the natural world and fertility, given the field of grain, her scepter, and her crown. Metaphysically speaking, she also resembles the productivity of the subconscious, seeded by ideas. In other words, she represents what one knows or believes from the heart. Similar to the Magician, the Empress is also supposedly related to another one of the planets, being Venus. The Empress is also made to be related to Aphrodite a lot, who is a figure from Greek mythology, or, obviously, Venus in Roman mythology. Another interesting tidbit can be found in author Edward Waite's book, The Pictorial Key of the Tarot. Waite related the Empress to the Virgin Mary on the account of motherhood. While Mary gave birth to the Son of God, aka God incarnate, the Empress was depicted as being a fruitful mother of thousands. Because of this, she can also be seen pregnant in many different tarot decks. Like Aphrodite and Venus, she can relate to beauty and romance or art. Basically, womanly-like things. The persona user wielding the Empress Arcana in Persona 5 is none other than Haru Okumura. In the original game, Haru comes in rather late to the plot in the overall story. In Persona 5 Royal, they do introduce her and tease her very early on, although nothing really happens with her until the usual end-game point. Despite this, she will still just as normally join your team during that period. In my opinion, Haru is kind of like an airhead. She isn't dumb or stupid, she just doesn't seem really all well put together. Ignorance is bliss, they say. Haru is the daughter of Okumura Foods CEO, wow, this name, Kunikazu, I think that's right, Kunikazu Okumura. Because of this, she is used to special treatment from schoolmates, teachers, and the likes who only truly form relations to her because of her family status. Her father also views her as nothing more than a use for business and forces her into a relationship with a scumbag rich boy that verbally will abuse her multiple times. Unlike the other members of your brigade, Haru is a character who will, before joining you, challenge your group's morals on a relationship level. As I mentioned earlier, Morgana will leave your party for some amount of time. Granted, while Morgana can be set in his own ways and unreasonably hard-headed at times, Morgana did have decently valid reasons for leaving. Morgana actually leaves to team up with Haru, whose alias is Noir. Haru is reluctant to originally joining your crew because she doesn't feel like that she can cooperate with people who not only don't know exactly what they're wanting to do, but also because of how easily they were okay with Morgana temporarily leaving. Like I said a moment ago, she names herself Noir because simply it is French for black. It is supposed to resemble the darker side of the law that she is now working under, being with your crew, despite her desire to be a heroine of justice. Haru's persona is none other than Milady de Winter, an evil and beautiful spy of the Cardinal from Alexandre Dumas's novel The Three Musketeers. I think that's how you pronounce his name. In the novel, Milady is depicted as a fierce, independent, and manipulative villain bringing others to ruin for personal gain. Fun fact, her title Milady is actually inherited from one of her husbands whom she married under a false name. This actually leaves her identity a complete mystery. So, how does Haru and Milady connect to the Empress Arcana? Well, I suppose one avenue that we could take would be Haru's nice and caring nature tied to her position as CEO of a great food company. This kind of works in line with how the Empress Arcana, represents wealth and nature and nurture. I am at a complete loss as to how Milady could relate to the Empress, aside from the fact that they, should just both be seen as a force to be reckoned with, but yeah, I'm a little confused as to why Haru has Milady as a persona in the first place, given how different they are in a fundamental belief system. It could simply be that the name Noir, alongside her whole musketeer-like outfit, matches well with Milady and her origins. As Zamkusen pointed out in his video, Symbolism in Persona 5, Personas, Costumes, and Weapons, Haru's costume and weaponry allude to that of a male. She is dressed as a 17th century gentleman, as Zamkusen puts it. Haru's way of rebelling is that of rebelling against the roles assigned to her as a woman, by disguising herself as a man. Next, we have the Emperor. So let's begin with information about the tarot card. The Emperor sits on a ram-adorned throne, symbolizing Mars. His white beard depicts his age, hence wisdom. He holds an Ankh scepter in his right hand, which is the Egyptian symbol for life, and a globe, being a symbol of domination, in his left hand. The throne sits on a stark, barren mountain, symbolizing the top of a secular hierarchy, the ultimate male ego. And that's about it, really, concerning the Emperor. Not much else. There's a little history concerning how the card art itself hasn't really changed throughout the years. However, the Emperor card itself has been the reason that other card arts have changed as far as like censorship and stuff goes, being specifically the Priestess and the Hierophant. So yeah, that's about it. Let's discuss the Emperor Arcana's affiliate, Yusuke. Yusuke's whole being for existence is art. He searches for the aesthetic everywhere in anything in his surroundings, from people to places. Kinda like me with philosophy. Some backstory regarding Yusuke. His mentor plagiarized his mother's painting, Sayuri. Turns out, Yusuke wasn't the only individual his mentor did this to, as he went after several of his previous pupils. As far as his personality goes, Yusuke is one of the ones that I would define as, weird. One of the other group characters even claims that Yusuke is on a different wavelength than other people. No surprise to Yusuke, that is. He's very level-headed and rash, which is weird in context of the other characters within your group who tend to be more on the sporadic side. There isn't much else about Yusuke in that regard. Nothing too important that I can, really think about. Moving on to Yusuke's persona, Gaomon. Gaomon was a Japanese outlaw and is actually mentioned in only 2 historical sources, both created after his death. The first source being the Toyotomi Hideyoshi Fu. I think I said that right. It details an attempted assassination of the shogun Hideyoshi Toyotomi in 1594. The other historical source is about Gaomon's death, which was written by Pedro de Morion, something like that. Good old Pedro here writes that Gaomon died by being boiled alive. As history continued on, Gaomon essentially became a Robin Hood-like figure for the Japanese, robbing the rich, giving his spoilers to the poor. Stories from the 19th and 20th centuries make him out to be some type of skilled ninja. The legend of Gaomon has since been adapted into movies, Japanese animated shows, and even video games. Most infamously, the Ganbare Gaomon series, which was published by Konami. Oh, yeah, by the way, Yusuke's alias is Fox, which is kind of weird in context of Mona's persona being Zoro, which is literally French for fox. I mean, I would rather have Yusuke use Gaomon over Zoro, considering Yusuke's fascination with Japanese art and tradition. But I suppose they could have changed their names, maybe? Make Yusuke's name Mona instead of Fox? I don't know, that kind of makes more sense because Mona can also allude to the Mona Lisa, which is a rather infamous work of art. Small little nitpick there, if you even want to call it that, I suppose. But I feel like it's, that's kind of an interesting little discussion point. So how do Yusuke and Gaomon relate to the egotistical, male toxic stereotype of the Emperor? Absolutely no stinking clue. Gaomon's morals seem completely contrary to that of the Emperor, and Yusuke is too laid back to be some type of leader of a secular hierarchy. Now, out of the group, Yusuke is, I would say, the wisest when it comes to decision-making, probably aside from Makoto. But regardless, many of the Emperor's wisdoms could be borrowed from there. Yusuke's appreciation for art could also have something to do with the Emperor's sense of control over life and Earth, or how a lot of modern day and even older depictions of art take on more of like a secular, humanistic approach to life and to the world, so maybe that can relate to the Emperor a bit. Actually, now that I think about it, the painting that Yusuke's mentor plagiarized from his mother was a painting of herself holding Yusuke as a child. So I suppose that's where the whole life thing could come into play, about how, the Emperor has dominion over life / the Earth. So I could kind of see how Sayuri is supposed to be a reflection of that, but Sayuri reminds me more of the Priestess than the Emperor. So I don't know, just discussion points. So woo. Next is the Hierophant. So the Hierophant Arcana is actually the first one that we have to discuss that is not actually affiliated with a Persona user. However, we're still going to discuss the tarot card origins with the card attached to it like we have been. Getting straight to the point, the Hierophant is also known as the Pope or Teacher of Wisdom. The card is usually depicted wearing a triple crown, has the keys of heaven at his feet, and his right hand raised, which is known to be a blessing, with 2 fingers pointing skyward and 2 pointing down. This is supposed to resemble the bridge between heaven and earth, reminiscent of that formed by the body of the hangman, so it seemingly isn't related to the magician, even though the magician has, a little bit of comparisons there. The Hierophant is thus a true quote-unquote pontiff, being the builder of the bridge between deity and humanity. In his left hand is a triple cross. The Hierophant is typically male, even in feminist structured tarot decks like the Mother Piece Tarot. The Hierophant is depicted sitting between 2 pillars, one being law and the other being liberty. Some, however, interpret the pillars to represent obedience and disobedience respectively instead. He's usually also seen with worshippers, given his role as the Pope, or even the Roman god Jupiter and its Greek alias Zeus. This card is also known as the High Priest in correlation to the High Priestess, or simply the Pope in correlation to the Pappus. The papacy was not just a religious force, but it was also used for political and military force as well. Thus, when the tarot was invented, the Pope controlled a large portion of central Italy. The original name of this card was simply the High Priest, but it was changed to Hierophant due to Antoine. Man, these names. Due to Antoine Court de Ghibelline, I think that's right, claiming that the title Hierophant was the title of the chief priest apart from an ancient Greek ritual, which of course they didn't want to associate themselves with. The character attached to the Hierophant Arcana is none other than Sojiro Sakura, who is the adoptive father of Futaba Sakura and your caretaker while on probation. He's also the owner of Café LeBlanc. The cafe is likely named LeBlanc in reference to Maurice LeBlanc, who is the author of the Arsène Lupin stories. The cafe is Arsene's dad! Sojiro, like many other characters, is extremely cautious when originally interacting with you. Sojiro doesn't, really care much for the logistics behind your trial, and truthfully only sees you as a rude kid who gets into other people's business. Conveniently enough, that changes when you bring a physical cat form of Morgana home to live with you. Sojiro is more apt to spend time with you and support you after you bring home Morgana, so clearly, he's got a soft spot for some kitties. Sojiro is a very smooth talker and a genuine good person. After you help his adoptive daughter Futaba come out of her shell regarding her mother's death, Sojiro will stand up for you and support you throughout the rest of the game. You essentially become a son of his at that point. So, how well does Sojiro and the Hierophant Arcana relate? Truthfully, and this is starting to become a trend, I'm not entirely sure. Like, a lot of this comparison and contrast thing is really more speculative, so, I mean, hey, it's working, we're going with it. I suppose they both have an emphasis on caretaking, Sojiro taking care of Yuan Futaba while the Pope taking care of his people. Aside from this, I'm rather unsure how Westla 2 can relate, even considering the Greco-Roman god counterpart thing. The relation could be found specifically of how Sojiro's cafe is named Le Blanc, which is the author of Arsène Lupin, and how Sojiro specifically shelters and aids the Phantom Thieves. Your teammates and the cafe locals also tend to call him boss, showing him a sense of authority and respect, similar to that of the Pope. Up next, we have the Lover's Arcana. The story behind the Lover's Arcana follows a rather simple, yet profound one. Originally, the Lover's Tarot cards showcased a new couple being given a blessing to wed by a noble. This was changed, however, with the Rider-Waite edition of the Tarot deck. Waite changed the description to feature Adam and Eve, emphasizing the importance of decisions that couples must face together. This can be seen given the Tree of Knowledge of Good and Evil found behind Eve, as well as the Tempting Snake. We can also see another tree behind Adam that holds 12 flames to represent the 12 signs of the zodiac. The nudity between Adam and Eve represents that they have nothing to hide from one another. Essentially, Waite wanted to make it perfectly clear how pure and everlasting love is intended to be. Because of how marriage is supposed to completely unite two partners in body, soul, and mind, the Lover's Arcana is also associated with the Gemini Zodiac, aka the twins. So the character we attach to the Lover's Arcana is in fact An Takamaki. An is a character that you meet nearly at the beginning of the game during the incident with your abusive schoolteacher. Wonderful. Not only is it revealed that the teacher is constantly pursuing himself on her, but he is also physically abusing her best friend to the point of attempted suicide. Because of this, An asks to join your party to take on the teacher under the alias Panther. There is an old medieval legend concerning the Panther, being that after sleeping in a cave for 3 days, the Panther would awaken and roar, emitting a sweet-smelling odor. This odor will draw in other creatures for the Panther to inevitably eat them. Throughout this whole incident, An actually remains super uplifting throughout the game's tough spots. She's always really sweet, thinking of others, and will tease you and the other party member, Ryuji, whenever possible. I'll admit, at a certain point during my initial run-through of the game, I almost got a tad annoyed because of how positive she was being. Nonetheless, she pushes through and unlocks her persona within. Speaking of which, An's persona is Carmen. Carmen is a fictive female gypsy created by Prosper Mérimée. I think I said that right. She first appeared in Mérimée's novella that was both written and published in 1845. The novella was adapted into multiple genres, but most noticeably the opera Carmen by French composer Georges Bizet. I know the T's supposed to be silent, so Bizet? I don't know. In any form of media Carmen can be found in, she is typically portrayed as a man-eater, or a person who would take advantage of her beauty and charm to make men fall for her, and obviously also quickly break the relationship off once she was bored. Now, get this, she ends up getting murdered by one of her exes that she swoons, so yeah, there's that. So how do An and Carmen relate to the lore of the Lover's Arcana? Well, truthfully, the depiction of the Lover's Arcana that Waite proposes is something that I feel like An would hold as an ideal. It seems rather ironic that Carmen, of all people, would be her assigned persona. After all, with personas being their inner selves, it almost makes me reconsider what I know about An. The relation with Carmen could have simply been due to how An is sexualized throughout the game, and how the team will use her charm once or twice and good looks when dealing with troublesome men. Even though An herself values romance more than just that. This correlation would fit into the mythology of the Panther, being An's alias, and thus her role in the team, but to me it's still weird how, you have Carmen as the assigned persona, when the Lover's Arcana is supposed to be more of like a representation of true and genuine love, yet Carmen and the Panther alias kind of go against that. It's more manipulative. But hey, interesting nonetheless. So for our 7th Arcana, we have the Chariot Arcana. The Chariot card is often depicted as having two horses at the front of the chariot, with a well-ordained figure sitting at the helm. The rider may often be found wearing a crown or helmet, holding some type of weapon, or potentially even having wings. In most representations, though, a mallet or gavel can be shown on the chariot's coat of arms to represent self-control. A group of stars hanging over top of the charioteer's head is to resemble celestial influences that the rider possesses. And that's about all the lore for the chariot. Honestly, it seems like these things get more simpler and simpler the more that we go into them. So our character that is affiliated to this arcana is none other than Ryuji Sakamoto. Ryuji is the second character you meet who ends up becoming a party member, but the first of which is human. Ryuji isn't exactly the smartest guy around, and he's rather quick-tempered, but he's got a lot of heart and guts, like a thug. Ryuji isn't afraid to speak his mind and will do just about anything for his friends, even going to the lengths of jumping off of a ship, Titanic style, to help his friends escape. Nice. Ryuji originally was the star of the track team, but due to the school hiring the abusive teacher that I keep mentioning, he ended up quitting. The track team then blamed him for their failure and essentially made him an outcast. You know, like a thug. It isn't until Ryuji confronts Kamoshida in his cognition that he awakens to his persona. He gets a thug outfit with a skull mask on it and is called Skull. You know, like a thug. So, that brings us to Ryuji's persona, Captain Kidd. Captain William Kidd was a Scottish sailor in the 17th century who was tried and executed for piracy after returning from a voyage in the Indian Ocean. You know, like a thug. Kidd's reputation as a pirate becomes that of legend and folklore, with many tall tales being told about he would presumably buried plundered treasure to protect it from his greedy associates. So, all in all, how do Ryuji and Captain Kidd relate to the Chariot Arcana? Well, I think it is critical to mention the contrast between the Chariot's sense of control and Ryuji's short temper. Truthfully, the Persona series is notoriously known for allowing you to form strong bonds and relationships with your party member and other characters, and when you do that, you can actually see growth in them through their dialogue and gameplay bonuses. I assume that much of the contrast that we'll be seeing and finding from Persona user to Arcana lore, and then obviously to their Personas as well, will kind of reflect how characters elevate closer towards the ideals from the Arcanas that they're associated with. Another thing to note is how the Chariot Arcana spoke of celestial influences from the stars, which could allude to many ship captains and pirates looking to the stars for guidance on their voyages. So, yeah, that's pretty cool. Eighth up, we have Justice! The major arcana of Justice actually has relations to several other arcanas too. For example, it accompanies the Temperance and Strength arcanas due to them, cardinal virtues and all. The cardinal virtues are principles that derive from Greek philosopher Plato's book called the Republic. They can be found in Book 4, page 426 to 435. Cicero then expanded upon them with Ambrose, Augustine of Hippo, and even Thomas Aquinas following. The four virtues are prudence, courage, temperance, and justice, with the latter two being major arcanas in tarot decks. Good old Waite's interpretation of justice includes rightness, equity, and triumph of the deserving side of the law. Waite would say that the opposite of justice would consist of bias, excessive severity, and even legal complications. That's funny. That's actually all I can find for the Justice Arcana. So our assigned character for the Justice Arcana is Goro Akechi. Akechi shows up in the story as a relatively kind and well-mannered soul as a prodigy detective who is still in high school. Akechi's sole purpose in the game is to find, expose, and arrest the Phantom Thieves. Even before he ironically joins your party, however, Akechi will like to often provoke or question the player character's ideals. Essentially, he's trying to get information out of you. Once you let him join your team, you kind of assume that that's all going to stop. But it does, but not for the reason that you think. He inevitably betrays you and your whole team and turns you into the police, where you get abused, drugged, and memory loss. Even with Akechi's sense of justice and morality being something that he upholds, he is extremely merciless. even going so far to straight up say in Persona 5 Royal that he would kill Kamoshida or Madarame, which are the first two villains in the game, had he been given the chance. So, what drove Akechi to this point? Why is he so merciless and fixated on crushing you and your group? Surprise, surprise, Akechi actually has a very dramatic and traumatic backstory. According to Akechi himself, his mother was raped by the same politician who sued you at the beginning of the game, and after Akechi's birth, she committed suicide. Going from foster home to foster home, Akechi grew bitter and hateful towards society, and aimed to climb the ladder as high as he could to eventually knock his father down. Rather than joining you and seeking forgiveness, Akechi sacrifices it all to go out the way that he started. By himself. Akechi's persona is interesting, to say the least. Somehow, someway, it's actually revealed that Akechi has the power of the wild card, aka the Fool's Arcana. While Akechi doesn't actually possess nor is affiliated with the Fool's Arcana, he does in fact have its abilities. I'm not sure why. Weird thing. I don't think they discuss either. Persona tends to do this. Persona 4 does it with Adachi, but hey, it's whatever. But because of it, nonetheless, Akechi is able to wield multiple personas just like you. The two that we see him use in the original game consist of Robin Hood and Loki. He specifically uses Robin Hood, which is a noble thief of English folklore, while affiliated with the Phantom Thieves. This is to go along with the whole theme of good people denying the constraints of society. Robin Hood represents a nearly perfect ideal of justice, which is ironic considering Akechi's upholding of the law and authority. It should be noted too that Robin Hood's design looks nothing like a modernized representation of Robin Hood. Within modern day media, Robin Hood is typically portrayed as a rather sly figure with green. Akechi's persona, however, sports no green to wear and is also incredibly muscled up with a superhero-like pose. Many fans have noticed this contrast between the real Robin Hood and Akechi's persona, and have pointed out that it could be a very strong indicator of how he stands out amongst the rest of your team, eventually betraying you. His weaponry even includes fictional weapons, such as a beam sword and laser gun, whereas all of your other party members wield real weapons. Loki is a god in Norse mythology. He is the father of Hel, a being that rules over the realm of the same name, which encompasses many of the dead, and also a part of the wolf Fenrir. There's some kind of like Dragon Ball Z fusion that Loki can do, and he can, fusion summon into Fenrir, I guess. Loki's relation to the gods often changes, sometimes assisting them and sometimes acting malicious or mischievous to them. Loki is usually depicted as a shapeshifter. Now, what's interesting is that the theories of Loki's mythology didn't actually spring up until 1835, which I was honestly shocked by. In 1835, Jacob Grimm produced a major theory regarding Loki, being that he was a god of fire. In 1889, Sophus Bugge adapted the theory into the idea that Loki is actually a variant of Christianity's Lucifer. It wasn't until 1856 when Folkstrom, who theorized that Loki is a hypostatic of the Nordic god Odin. In 1959, Jan de Vries, theorized that Loki actually symbolizes the typical trickster figure. In 1961, Anne Brigitte Ruth concluded that Loki originated as a spider. A year later, in 1962, Anna Holtzmark concluded that no conclusion could be made about Loki. So much for that history lesson, but oh boy, that was a doozy. In conclusion, while Robin Hood resembles retaliation for the better of mankind, Loki can resemble retaliation for evil, cruel, or malicious reasons. Again, Loki and Robin Hood are the only two personas that we can see Akechi use. If Akechi really has the power of the wild card, shouldn't his personality and roles in the story be more flexible, like the ability to use more than, just those two personas? Technically, yes, but Futaba tells us that the only reason Akechi is limited to two personas is because he never relied on anyone else. Because Akechi was constantly worried about being liked and approved by people, Akechi never formed any real relationships with others. This is why Akechi could not wield any more personas. Akechi's codename while affiliated with the Phantom Thieves is Crow. Now, the Crow has a rather few different legends tied to it. In some cultures, a crow could represent divine revelation sent by the gods, bad omen, or, frankly, just a typical trickster. The latter of the two of these legends obviously relate to how Crow tries to trick and take down the Phantom Thieves, while the foremost, being that the Crow resembles divine revelation, can be seen as how Crow joins your team, and how, Crow is this prodigy detective, and he's kind of someone that, not the Phantom Thieves as a whole, but you, the player character, can kind of look up to, be like, yeah, that guy I look up to. His sense of moralities and justice are great. And so he joins your team, which kind of, can be seen as the Crow coming down and bestowing divine revelation when he joins your team. So, yeah, there's that. So how do Akechi, Robin Hood, Loki, and Loki relate to the Justice Arcana? Well, Akechi actually seems like a relatively decent blend between Robin Hood and Loki. Akechi's mercilessness tendencies and betrayal against you and your squad members resemble most from Loki, but Akechi's sense of justice definitely comes from Robin Hood. It's interesting to find that Loki resembles well with Akechi's actions, but Robin Hood aligns more with the Arcana. Truly a parallel dynamic.
Next, we have the Hermit Arcana. The Hermit Arcana is typically depicted as showing an old man on a mountain peak holding a staff in one hand and a six-pointed star lantern in the other. According to Eden Gray, aka American actress Priscilla Partridge, the lamp that the hermit holds is supposedly the lamp of truth, used to guide the unknowing, and his staff is meant to help him navigate narrow paths as he seeks enlightenment. His cloak represents his cause for discretion and staying isolated. Waite describes the hermit as corrupt, prudent, circumspected, and especially Tresian. The character affiliated with the Hermit Arcana is in fact Futaba Sakura. Futaba in Persona 5 is what we would literally call a hermit. Futaba stays isolated from people, locked away in her house. It isn't until you and the Phantom Thieves break in after hearing rumors of her that you find out the truth behind her story. Turns out Futaba's mother was a very prominent cognitive researcher with a focus of supernatural occurrences that happen within a person's cognition. Futaba's mother died in a car accident, however her murderers played it off as a suicide. Shortly before her mother's death, Futaba and her mother had a small dispute regarding Futaba bothering her while she was working. Due to the implication of suicide and their argument, Futaba blames herself for the death of her mother. Again, it isn't until you and the rest of the Phantom Thieves figure out the truth for yourself of Futaba, finally accepting her mother's death as outside of her hands and outside of her responsibility. Futaba, like her mother, is also extremely tech-savvy. Her alias, when originally contacting the Phantom Thieves, Alibaba, could be a reference to the Chinese multinational technology company of the same name. It could also be a reference to the Arabic tale of Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, where Alibaba is a poor woodcutter who discovers the thieves' den by saying the words, "Open Sesame." This could easily allude to how Futaba intruded onto the Phantom Thieves, similar to Alibaba and the Thieves' Den, but also how Futaba is a highly skilled hacker. Futaba's codename within the Phantom Thieves is Oracle in English, but Navi in Japanese. The word Oracle can simply be defined as someone, typically a priest or priestess, who acts as a medium through whom advice or prophecy was sought from the gods in classical antiquity. In other words, it is someone you look towards for help, advice, or in a time of need. The name Navi is of Indian origin and means kind to people. It also could come from Hebrew, meaning to name. What most people playing Persona 5 may associate Futaba's Japanese codename with, however, is Navi from The Legend of Zelda. In the Legend of Zelda series, Navi is a fairy who helps assist the player and guides them throughout the game. In this case, Navi is simply a shortened version of the word navigator, which is, of course, the role of the fairy. All of the definitions, excluding the Hebrew one, can point to Futaba's role on the team. She helps assist the team in battle, granting you status buffs, healing you, or replenishing your special points. At times too, when you're in the randomly generated Dungeon of Mementos, she will scout out a map for the player so they do not have to drive aimlessly through the dungeon. Futaba's role is to help assist and guide the team, like an oracle or navigator. Futaba's persona is actually the Necronomicon, which I found incredibly fascinating. The Necronomicon is also known as the Book of the Dead. The Necronomicon is a fictional textbook of magic written by author H.P. Lovecraft. It was first shown off in Lovecraft's 1942 story, The Hound. Lovecraft writes that the title of the book was a translation from the Greek words nekros, nomos, and icon, supposedly meaning an image of the law of the dead. Other authors have noted that the name of the book has varied quite a bit over some time. Other titles include Book of the Names of the Dead, Book of the Laws of the Dead, Book of Dead Names, and Knower of the Laws of the Dead. In 1927, Lovecraft wrote a brief pseudo-history of the Necronomicon that was published in 1938 after his death in 1937. The book was supposedly called The History of the Necronomicon and stated that the book was originally called Al-Azif, which Lovecraft claimed was Arabic for the nocturnal sound of insects supposed to be howling from demons. That is quite a long definition for such a short phrase. Despite this, there is still a lot, and I mean a lot, of false history concerning the Necronomicon, even coming from Lovecraft himself. So, that's about all of the decently valid information I could piece together from the Necronomicon. So, yeah. How do Futaba and the Necronomicon relate to the Hermit Arcana? Well, here's a few takes. First of all, we have Futaba, who is a literal hermit. She's isolated herself from society, keeping to herself with her own business, like the Hermit Traveler. Her story concerning her mother and the ambiguity of the Necronomicon's truth origin could relate to the Hermit's Lamp of Truth, and how it's used to guide those, well, to truth. It's rather ironic that the developers decided to use such a controversial and ambiguous artifact for a persona that's connected to an arcana that is truth-seeking. Futaba's role as a navigator and supporter within the Phantom Thieves could also allude to the Hermit's role of guiding and helping others too. For our 10th Arcana, we have the Wheel of Fortune Arcana. It is at this point in the video that I realize you're supposed to pronounce the cards as tarot cards and not tarot. Awesome sauce. I'll probably still go back and forth, so whatever. So the interesting information about the Fortune Arcana card comes mostly from its artwork. Out of all of the tarot cards, the Wheel of Fortune card is the one that varies the most from deck to deck. While at times, the Wheel of Fortune card has inscribed words or phrases on each part of the wheel, the one that I found most interesting was the tarot spelling inscribed on the wheel. What is really fascinating about this is that as it is spelled to say tarot while reading it clockwise, it spells Torah counterclockwise. On top of that, if you read it clockwise, starting with R, you spell rota, which is Latin for wheel. The wheel can also be seen alternating the T-A-R-O with the Hebrew tetragrammaton. Regardless, it makes it spell Y-H-W-H, Yahweh, which is the Israel spelling for God. On top of that, the wheel can be seen having the 4 elements placed around the wheel, which also has its connections to the Magician Major Arcana. Whew! The amount of symbolism with this card's art alone is really cool. I'm having a heyday, guys. The character we have attached to the Fortune Arcana is none other than Chihaya Mifune. I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce that. Mifune, ironically enough, acts as a fortune teller within the game. She predicts the fortunes of other people with the help of the tarot cards, and she's rather good at it. While spending time with her, you will soon find out that she is working under a New Age con artist group called the Assembly of Divine Power. Even though Mifune's powers are legitimate, she sells the Assembly's fake stones to garner an income. What is interesting about Mifune is that her name heavily resembles Chizuko Mifune, who is a psychic that allegedly possessed the gift of clairvoyance, but died to suicide at age of 24 in 1911. The name of the leader of the Assembly of Divine, Yuichi Fukurai, is also most likely a reference to Tomokichi Fukurai, a psychologist who worked with Chizuko Mifune to prove the existence of the psychic power. I probably butchered their names, but I don't care right now. So it's very clear how their characters relate to their real-life origins. That's neat. I actually didn't know that prior to this video. My script amazes even me. By the end of her Confidant story, Mifune comes to realize that the Phantom Thieves are living proof that destiny, and thus the future, can be changed from what she predicts with her readings. So, how does Mifune relate to the Fortune Arcana? Well, if it isn't clear enough, Mifune's Confidant tells a story of how destiny can change and how we are not bound to mindless fate. The fortune of the future can be changed and altered. In a way, Mifune's story parallels with the idea of rebellion as the player character shows her how to defy the constraints of the future. Up next, we have the Strength Arcana. The Strength Arcana portrays a woman leaning over a lion. Many different versions of this card actually also showcase the woman clasping the lion's jaws or feature the infinity symbol over her head. Some other versions have the woman sitting on the lion, having her hand on the lion, or potentially just one of the characters. Flowers are also often depicted on the card. Eden Grey pokes her nose in the Arcanas again. This time, she interprets the infinity sign above the woman to resemble spiritual powers, whereas the lion represents animal passions and earthly cravings. The Strength card is also accompanied with the Temperance and Justice Arcanas being one of the cardinal virtues. VIII also describes the Strength Arcana to possess power, energy, action, courage, and complete honor and success. The characters affiliated with the Strength Arcana are actually a set of twins, being Caroline and Justine. During your probation under Igor in the Velvet Room, the twins act as your correctional officers. Caroline is the more aggressive one of the two, verbally abusing and kicking the player. Justine, on the other hand, appears to be more calm and soft-spoken, but still addresses the player in a condescending tone. The two are actually two halves of a whole person, being Lavinza. Lavinza is their true identity and was split into two by an evil, possessed Igor. Lavinza acts and speaks more maturely than the two twins, but can still maintain a soft tone like Justine, yet can be impatient like Caroline. Unlike the twins, Lavinza will address you by your Arcana, aka Trickster, instead of calling you as Inmate. Neither of them possess a persona, but supposedly they are quote-unquote dolls that Igor turned to life, so they clearly have some sort of higher supernatural abilities. At first, I thought I remembered the game saying that the Velvet Room assistants were homunculus, but I couldn't ever find that to prove it, so I would like to find some weight behind that idea though, because I feel like it would make it really interesting, aside from just dolls, but either way, cool fact. With this being said and done, I guess, how can we relate the Strength Arcana to the twins? Well, the twins definitely possess power over you during your rehabilitation. They're your wardens, after all. The woman in the card art is even depicted as having tamed the lion, or at least forcing it to be silent. I suppose we could make the assumption you as the inmate are to be the lion, but I'm unsure. The depiction of the woman having her hand calmly upon the lion could obviously relate more to Justine, with Caroline being the more aggressive of the two. The depiction of the twins having strong supernatural abilities can also be seen with the infinity symbol above the woman in the Arcana. I suppose that the woman in the card art would best resemble Lavinza rather than the twins separately, so that's an idea there. For our 12th Arcana, we have the Hanged Man. The Hangman Arcana is actually a rather interesting one when it comes to other related symbolic references. For example, the method of hanging a man upside down by his ankle was common punishment for traitors in Italy, but the Arcana implies that the man is there on his own accord in a sense of self-sacrifice, rather than him being there due to corporal punishment or criminality. Some depictions of the Hangman card shows Odin, who suspended himself from a tree in order to gain knowledge, or even Judas Iscariot. In Waite's book, The Pictorial Key to the Tarot, Waite writes this idea of the Hangman card. The gallows from which he is suspended forms a tau cross, while the figure, from the position of his legs, forms a Pfeiflot cross. There is a nimbus about the head of the seeming martyr. It should be noted that the tree of sacrifice is living wood with leaves thereon, that the face expresses deep entrancement, not suffering, that the figure as a whole suggests life and suspension, but life and not death. It has been called falsely a card of martyrdom, a card of prudence, a card of great work, a card of duty. I will say very simply on my own part that it expresses the relation in one of its aspects between the divine and the universe. Man, Waite was on some stuff, I'm just saying. In Persona 5, the character that we have affiliated with the Hangman is Munahisa Iowa. Iowa, which is only what I will be referring to him as, is the owner of the airsoft shop Untouchable that Ryuji takes you to near the beginning of the game. Iowa seems extremely cold-hearted, closed off, and frankly, sketchy. However, once you start hanging out with him and you show him your guts, literally, Iowa opens up to you. Iowa grew up in a really crappy and broken family lifestyle. This led him to join a local gang where he was sworn into membership. One day, a woman came into Iowa's store wanting to sell her infant son for drug money. Iowa refused, so the woman just left the child there. After adopting the boy, Iowa was forced out of the gang and ended up living a quote-unquote normal life for the sake of the boy. So how does Iowa and the Hangman Arcana relate? Now, before going into this Arcana, I was honestly worried that there wasn't going to be much relation and would have to assume that it worked best, kind of like a catchy or something, but I'm glad I got these results. Personally, I found the relationship between the two within Iowa's self-sacrifice to adopt the boy. Iowa never states or insinuates that he regrets adopting his son. He gladly took the boy in and raised it so the boy wouldn't have a childhood like his own. Iowa is the Hangman, and even though we assume that Iowa's current position as a quote-unquote regular civilian is punishment for his old gang, Iowa's current life status as a father is something that he made of his own accord. In a way, we could say Iowa betrayed his gang, but the emphasis should be on the Hangman's element of self-sacrifice. For our 13th Arcana, in very classic fashion, we have the Death Arcana. So the Death card has actually been drastically interpreted in many different ways, and because of this, the illustration also varies quite a bit from deck to deck. In some versions of the tarot, the card is simply named the card with no name, Rebirth, or Death Rebirth, in hopes of giving a less frightening meaning. The card is intended to symbolize giving up any and everything that is superficial in your life and concentrating on the basic, fundamental, and truly important things. As I previously stated, it is the 13th listed card in the tarot deck, thus why the number 13 is a quote-unquote bad luck number. The card also typically depicts the Grim Reaper, who is personified death, wielding a scythe or holding a white flower. According to good old Eden Gray and other authors, it is unlikely that the card actually represents physical death and rather embodies an ending to things like relationships or interests. Because of this, it also implies an increased sense of self-awareness. Gray also speculates that the Death Arcana represents a change of thinking, shown by some versions of the Arcana's art showing Death riding a horse, which is stepping over a king, symbolizing how not even royalty can stop change. The character that is affiliated with the Death Arcana is Tai Takami. Takami is a back alley doctor who gives you and your team medicine throughout the game. Her reputation as the Plague has made her highly cynical and insecure, which allows her to see if any of her patients have any sort of ulterior motive behind their need for medicine. That's about all there is to Takami, sadly. Truthfully, she's a character that I heavily enjoyed spending time with for her sarcastic and witty remarks, but as far as her story goes, that's basically all that relates to the Death Arcana. So, how does Death relate to Takami? Well, I suppose the two could relate in context of Takami's medicine. Not many other doctors or physicians in the game approve of her medicine or methods, so her practices could indicate that sense of necessary change or end of the old. Since the Death Arcana is also called Rebirth, their relation could be behind the idea of healing and health, given to Kami's role as a doctor. For our 14th Arcana, we have Temperance. The Temperance Arcana is usually depicted as a woman, or sometimes a winged angel, pouring liquid from one carrier to another, usually representing the dilution of wine and water. This could represent purity, as wine being an alcoholic drink has negative connotations attached to it. Waite associates the Temperance Arcana with frugality, the economy being manageable and accommodation. The character that we have attached to the Temperance Arcana is Sadayo Kawakami. Kawakami is your school homeroom teacher in the game. She's typically always stressed out and worrying about the other students or them getting into needless trouble. It isn't long into the game where you and 2 other students discover that Kawakami is actually working part-time as a maid. That's what we'll call her, a maid. The 2 of you work out a deal that if you do not tell the staff at school, she will allow you to use her services on the weekends. After hanging out with her more, she reveals to the player that she is actually working part-time for her supposedly ill sister who is in the hospital. However, you discover much later that the real reason she is working as a maid is to pay off a debt that she owes to a deceased student's guardians who blame Kawakami for the student's death. Now, because you're a good guy and all, you and the rest of your group decide to help Kawakami out by changing the hearts of those guardians, thus saving her from her debt. So, all in all, how does Kawakami relate to the Temperance Arcana? Truthfully, this had me a little rattled at first, but I think I more or less got the gist of it. The Temperance Arcana resembles purity, with wine and water, but also has a sense of being financially well off. I suppose the relation is with Kawakami's ability to manage her life as a teacher and a maid, while also trying her best to take care of herself throughout paying off her loan. My friend Bisquick pointed out too that Kawakami has 2 jobs, that of a maid and a teacher, which could represent the wine and water respectively. She takes up her job as a maid in order to dilute her guilt as a teacher. Really fascinating stuff, so thanks Bisquick. Up next, we have the Devil Arcana. Before we get into the iconology of the tarot card itself, let's discuss Waite's ideas and inspiration for the Devil Arcana. Waite describes the Devil Arcana to be associated with violence, force, fatality, and use of extraordinary efforts. Interestingly enough, Waite's acronyms for the Devil Arcana also includes weaknesses, pettiness, and blindness. Take that, Satan. As far as the iconology goes, we can see the devil having harpy feet, ram horns, bat wings, a reversed pentagram on its forehead with a raised right hand and a lowered left hand, which is holding a torch. The devil in this depiction is also more akin to Eliphas, or Eliphas, Levi's famous illustration of Baphomet, which is a separate deity that the Knights Templar, a Catholic military order, were accused of worshipping, as well as being its own persona within Persona 5. In pre-Levi tarot decks, such as Jean Dodal's Tarot of Marcellus, the devil is portrayed with breasts, a face on its stomach, eyes on its knees, lion feet, and male genitalia. In both Waite and Dodal's depictions, however, the devil is accompanied with 2 demonic-like creatures that are chained to the pedestal that the devil sits on. In conclusion, the Arcana is to represent seduction to the material world and physical pleasures, such as obsession with money and power and lust. It also represents living in fear, domination, and bondage, being caged by an overabundance of luxury. Now, the character we have affiliated with the Devil Arcana is Ichiko Oya, which is a journalist. Oya is a very dedicated and passionate journalist, so much so that she expresses she wouldn't ever quit her job. Her story essentially revolves around a news piece that she was working on to uncover a scandal concerning one of Masayoshi Shido's cohorts. Because of Shido's influence, Oya was not only reassigned to purely work on entertainment pieces, but her partner, Keiyo Murakami, was framed for Oya's work and disappeared. Feeling completely betrayed and used, Oya has become incredibly cynical. After spending time with her and moving forward along with her confidant, Oya becomes more idealistic once again and inevitably chooses to go back towards working on the Shido scandal. So, all in all, how does Oya and the Devil Arcana relate? Well, for starters, I can go ahead and tell you that Oya doesn't have two demonic beings chained to her 24/7 or anything like that. I think in context of the Devil Arcana itself, it possesses traits that we do not want. We do not actively want to be lustful or hold on to an obsession. At least, those things are not seen as positive or good traits for humanity. In a way, these negative attributes that the Devil Arcana holds could relate to Oya's fall from grace, when it comes from her journaling practices. After she was reassigned to do purely entertainment pieces, she became incredibly cynical and, quite frankly, a manipulator. Spending time with her helps her with these issues, as stated before, and guides her to a more idealistic perspective of life and her job. Rather than most of the other characters' stories striving to have more attributes of their arcana, Oya's story can be seen as her drifting away from the narrative of the Devil Arcana's morals. For our next arcana, I forgot what number we're on, we have the Tower Arcana. The Tower Arcana follows immediately after the Devil Arcana in all tarot decks that contain it. The Tower Arcana is associated with sudden, disruptive revelation and potentially destructive change. Some versions of tarot decks show the Tower card featuring two nude people fleeing from a burning building, a tree being struck by lightning, or even the devil beating on drums. Multiple explanations for the card's various imagery could be derived from the biblical story of the Tower of Babel, where God destroys a tower built by mankind to reach heaven, the harrowing of hell, which is Christ's triumphant descent to hell between the time of his death and resurrection, or even Adam and Eve's expulsion from the Garden of Eden. All of these biblical events contain the theme of sudden change. Not only did God destroy the Tower of Babel, but he changed the languages that the people spoke so that they could not communicate, a drastic and sudden change. Jesus' descent to hell allows him to bring salvation to all the righteous people who had died since the beginning of the world. This would be a huge upset for hell, causing sudden change. Lastly, Adam and Eve being kicked out of the Garden of Eden would not only be a drastic change for them, as the garden was all they knew, but their sins against God drastically changed the very fabric of mankind, steering us away from perfect unison with Him. Their betrayal against God and the results following that should be self-explanatory as to why that's a sudden change. Now to discuss the character associated with the Tower Arcana, Shinya Oda. Shinya is the son of a single helicopter parent, his mom. His mother teaches Shinya and raises him under the mindset that losing is bad and only winners are acceptable. The strong prey on the weak and the fittest survive. Because of this, Shinya acts accordingly to this mindset both at school and even in the community of his favorite video game, Gunabout. Shinya's attitude towards life is even reflected with his given title in the Gunabout community, labeled King. Ultimately, this is what Shinya thinks of himself, a king. He bullies kids twice as hard that bully him, even going so far as to force a kid into a losing fight and then taking their money. Shinya, however, is a starstruck fan of the Phantom Thieves, probably due to the ideology that Shinya has about them, that they're strong and can do whatever they want. It isn't until Shinya meets the player character that Shinya realizes his ideology about life is wrong, and that his mother is nothing but brutal. After changing his mother's heart, Shinya becomes friends with the kids at his school and those within the gaming community. All's well that ends well. So how does the Tower Arcana relate to Shinya? Well, the Tower Arcana represents sudden change, usually in a negative connotation, making it more likely to interpret it as sudden destruction. I think one way that you can relate Shinya to the Tower Arcana is having the Tower represent his and his mother's fittest survive ideology. Since that ideology is purely the Oda family's drive, seeing the evil and twisted ideology come crashing down would be destructive. It is almost like Shinya and his mother's story relates most to the Harrowing of Hell inspiration rather than the Tower of Babel or Garden of Eden. I say this because in the Harrowing of Hell, Jesus is seen to save those imprisoned in hell, similarly to how Joker saves the Oda family from their distorted way of life. The Garden of Eden and Tower of Babel do not focus on the redemptive aspect that the Harrowing of Hell does, which Shinya's story seems to indicate at the end. Up next is the Star Arcana. The Star Arcana shows a nude woman kneeling at the edge of a small pool. We can see that she is holding two containers of water, one in her left hand symbolizing the subconscious, and the one in her right hand symbolizing the conscience. She pours out the water to nourish the earth and to continue the cycle of fertility, represented by the landscape around her. The other container pours water onto dry land in 5 small streams, representing the 5 senses. The woman also only has 1 foot on land, which represents her practical abilities and good common sense. The foot that is in the water represents her intuition and inner resources to listen to her inner voice. Her nudity represents her vulnerability and purity under the clear emptiness of the night sky. Behind her shines one lone large star, which represents her core essences with 7 smaller spears representing the chakras. The character that we have attached to the Star Arcana is none other than Togo Hifume. Togo Hifume is a student at Kosei High School, also being Yusuke's classmate. She is a shogi expert and an idol that already has appeared in magazines, thus she begins to have a following fanbase. She is known to play shogi by herself at Kanda's church, so Joker goes to see her under the pretext of being interested by shogi and wants her to be his teacher. When she plays shogi, she basically transforms into a totally different person, going from a shy, reserved person to a more serious and harsh-speaking one. We then learn about her situation as an idol, which she basically doesn't like and would rather be known as a shogi player rather than an idol. We are then introduced to Togo's mother. Togo's mother pushes her to be an idol so she can make lots of money, while also just not caring about shogi or anything else at all that her daughter is interested in, even prohibiting her from dating. While you hang out with Togo, you encounter a pro shogi player that really dislikes her for some reason. As her mother continues pushing her, Togo implores the Phantom Thieves to do something about her situation. She tells you her mother's name and you go to Mementos to change her heart. You fight her, she realizes that she was wrong, and also admits to having her daughter's matches arranged so that she gets more spotlight and sponsors. Togo is really happy to see her mother have a change of heart and then goes on to challenging a pro player and you go with her to spectate. She does a few good moves, but ends up getting downright destroyed. She comes back, talks to you about how she was destroyed, but is happy about it, and she'll have to relearn everything starting from the base as you begin to date her if, you choose to do so. So how does Hifumi relate to the Star Arcana? Well, first, I think we could say that Hifumi represents the woman within the Arcana. Hifumi's Confidant is about her being stuck between her life as a shogi player or as a model. The woman pouring water into the pool and onto the land can represent Hifumi's struggle with her reputation as a shogi player and as a model. Modeling is something that she can do to be financially stable, but is not where her passions lie. Her quote-unquote inner voice, being the small pool, represents her will to be a shogi player. That is her true passion, and that is what she wants to lean into. The moon, or star, shining upon the woman in the artwork could represent Hifumi's mother, as her nudity represents complete vulnerability towards her in the light of the night sky. Next up, we got the Moon Arcana. The Moon Arcana is a very interesting one, as it is the single card I had to look at more than 5 websites to even get somewhat of an understanding about it. This card is weird, let me just say. This one was so frickety-frackety confusing to me. So all in all, the basic gist that I got here is that the moon card shows a full moon in the night sky positioned between two large towers. The moon here symbolizes intuition, dreams, and the unconscious. Its light is dim compared to the sun, as it only slightly illuminates the path to higher consciousness between the two towers. We also see a small pool in the foreground of the card, representing the subconscious mind. We can also see a small crayfish crawling out of the pool, symbolizing the early stages of consciousness unfolding. Lastly, we have a dog and a wolf standing in this grassy field, howling at the moon. The two represent the tamed and the wild aspects of our mind. That is a lot to do with one card. Whew. Now, the character that we have affiliated to the Moon Arcana is in fact Yuki Mishima. In Mishima's story, he is continuously trying to get the Phantom Thieves' names out there and famous through this fan site he makes, so that he himself will become popular too. Of course, it doesn't go as planned. He starts getting more and more invested into the fan site and wants to use his position on it to make himself seem useful in some way. In Mishima's Confidant, we're introduced to one of his old bullies, Akiyama, who constantly refers to Mishima as a zero. So, naturally, Mishima is out to prove to his old bully, and in turn himself, that he isn't a zero. By this point, he's getting pretty desperate, and he wants your group, the Phantom Thieves, to change a famous person's heart so people will recognize the Phantom Thieves more. He doesn't have the evidence that this celebrity is bad or not, but he pushes it onto the Phantom Thieves anyway, then pushes you to change Akiyama's heart. Rather than complying with his requests, the team decides to go into Mementos to see if Mishima's shadow is corrupt or not. Surprise to no one, his shadow is found and is acting rather cruel. He goes on to say that it's the Phantom Thieves' fault he is acting this way because he knew his role at school when Kamoshida, the abusive teacher, was running around. But when the Phantom Thieves showed up, Mishima felt like he could be more, and now he just doesn't know what to do with himself. The Phantom Thieves decide to do nothing regarding Mishima's shadow and heart, and attempt to just let Mishima get over his own self-confidence himself, and to see if he can do something positive with the fan site. We then meet up with Akiyama in the real world, who is getting harassed, and Mishima stands up for him. Akiyama sees that Mishima isn't the zero he used to be, and Mishima gets his self-confidence back. So, how does Mishima relate to the Moon Arcana? I personally see the relation between Mishima and the moon within the eternal struggle that Mishima battles in Persona 5. While Mishima is a case of selfishness and just wanting to become popular, Mishima tries to lean more towards a humbling role at the end of the game, wanting to support the Phantom Thieves in any way he can for their cause. I suppose we could argue that the wolf resembles Mishima's selfishness, and the tame dog represents his oncoming, humbling nature. As far as the two towers, the moon, the pool, the crayfish, I'm at a loss, guys. Like I said, I had to go to 5 websites just to understand what each of these things meant. Relating them is hard, that's all I'm saying. This one's really tough. Alright, next up we have the Sun Arcana. The Sun Arcana, according to VIII, is considered to be associated with attained knowledge. The artwork showcases an infant riding a white horse under an anthropomorphized sun. I think that's how you pronounce that. It's anthropomorphic, but it's like the past tense. So anthropomorphized, anthropomorphized, I don't know. Just the baby, titled Child of Life, can be seen holding a red flag. The red flag is intended to represent the blood of renewal. This, paired with the sun smiling down on him, represents accomplishments. The card itself is generally depicted as an all-around good card, sometimes being referred to as the best card in tarot games. The character in Persona 5 that we have attached to the Sun Arcana is Toranosuke. Whew. Yoshida, who is a politician. Because Yoshida was a confidant I never had the pleasure in personally adventuring in, I asked around Discord and I was given this summary by frequent positron, aka Joseph Rutkin. Yoshida was removed from the National Diet 20 years before the start of Persona 5, and by showing him your work ethic at his favorite beef bowl shop, he allows you to help him at his speeches, in exchange for teaching you how to perform public speaking. His story is one of regaining lost confidence and holding onto one's belief in the face of those who would have him sacrifice them in the name of reaching the Diet. In the beginning, he is constantly heckled by his audience as he regains his sense of self-worth and confidence. His audience grows in both size and support. This leads to the son of his former boss approaching him, as well as a member of another party. Both the son and the member tries to recruit Yoshida to their side, but through his own moral character and with the help of the protagonist, he forgoes both opportunities, opting to reach the Diet on his own merits. The end of his story with the protagonist sees him deducing that you are a member of the Phantom Thieves and lamenting your different paths in life, although you are both fighting to make the world a better place. During the final boss battle, he can be seen watching and wishing he was 20 years younger so he could join you in the fight. He also commits himself to speaking about your unjust imprisonment while you're in jail, drumming up support for your release among the public. Thanks, Joseph. So, all in all, how does Yoshida relate to the Sun Arcana? Truthfully, one thing I've noticed through a lot of the Arcana's characters is that the character story within their confidant routes contribute to them becoming more akin to the ideals placed by their Arcanas. The trend seems to be following here with Yoshida, but first we must ask, is Yoshida the infant or is he the son? While writing the script, I must admit I pictured Yoshida to be the child. Yoshida's confidant is about him regaining self-confidence in his public speaking. He is essentially renewing himself in this process, and this can be seen with the decision he makes regarding the 2 job offers. But then I took a step back. Out of all the characters, Yoshida was chosen to be affiliated with the Sun Arcana. The Arcana is not called the Infant, or anything like that. The Sun is supposed to be the subject here. If Yoshida is the Sun, then Yoshida is the one in the card whom shines down accomplishments on others. The only other character that would fit the role of the Infant within Yoshida's story would have to be you, the player character. Yoshida gives you advice concerning public speaking. He is the one granting you the accomplishments, and you are the one going through renewal. Your next question should then be this: what renewal is the player character going through? Well, I suppose you could look at this in 2 ways. The first way could be, say that the player character is similar to that of a caterpillar coming out of a cocoon to be a butterfly. Similar to the butterfly being constrained to its metamorphosizing phase, Joker is constrained to society. The only way out is to change, to stand out, and to be different. That is one form of renewal that the player could be going through, in which Yoshida assists you. The second way that you could interpret this could be the player's process of Igor's rehabilitation. Granted, Yoshida doesn't directly help you with this at all. Now, at the end of the game, when you are put in jail, Yoshida will speak out with the public, trying to get you out, trying to get the public's opinion. However, you're successful with this, whether you spend time with him or not. So all in all, I think that we can see the resemblance here between the Sun itself with the Arcana and Mr. Yoshida himself. So that one was great. Alright guys, we are almost done. We're going to talk about the Judgement Arcana next. There isn't too terribly much to discuss here. The card's iconography is purely related to the Last Judgment from the biblical book of Revelation. The card showcases an angel, possibly Metatron, blowing a big trumpet to emerge multitudes of people from their graves to all ascend to heaven. Some versions of the card showcase snow-covered mountains in the background, indicating a relation to winter, which is when Christ is believed to have come to Earth in bodily form and have been born. The character that we have associated to the Judgement Arcana in Persona 5 is Sai Nijima, coincidentally, Makoto Nijima's older sister. VIII is a public prosecutor who interrogates the player throughout the game. She is incredibly envious of her co-workers' success in the prosecution office, since their success is ridden off the fact that they are men, and she is not. Because of the fact that she is at a disadvantage when it comes to her occupation, she believes that she needs to manipulate and twist words in court in order to get the results that she wants. In the original base game version of Persona 5, she is the only character that you form a confidant with who has a palace, excluding Futaba, who ends up joining her team. Once you change her heart after defeating her and stealing her treasure in her palace, she unknowingly assists you and the Phantom Thieves to escape from Goro Akechi's betrayal scheme of assassinating you. So how does VIII relate to the Judgement Arcana? Well, aside from the obvious correlation with her working in judicial law, VIII is the only thing standing between you and certain death. If you cannot convince her to believe your story about leading the Phantom Thieves and the Metaverse, she will unknowingly leave you for dead. Ultimately, she is the judge. I think one thing worth mentioning here is how, as a prosecutor up until the end of the game, she relates to the Old Testament idea of God, that God is a judge and justice bringer upon the world. He repeatedly corrects man's sins and punishes them appropriately, like a prosecutor. However, at the end of the game, VIII decides to become a defense attorney. She decides to help and defend rather than serve punishments. The correlation here can be found with how God sent Jesus down to Earth to help, defend, and guide mankind, whereas the devil acts as a prosecutor in the New Testament by pointing out man's sins for cause of damnation. Jesus' role is to say, yes, they've messed up, but I'll take the blame, as he does by dying for mankind's sins on a cross. While VIII is not being crucified for her client's misdeeds, the mindset shift is definitely there. Lastly, I want to circle back around and clarify something about the Fool's Arcana, and then we'll be done. Rather than the player character being specifically placed as the Fool, the Arcana of the Fool is actually given to Igor, the Master of the Velvet Room, who gives you official instructions and help regarding your persona. The tarot decks are not only utilized for playing games and telling fortunes, but they also tell a story regarding that of the Fool. So it's a little strange to me how Igor is technically the Fool when you are the one that the story focuses on and has the most correlation with. It's as if Igor passes the Arcana on to you indirectly. However, at the end of the game, Igor and his assistant Lavenza give you the World Arcana, so I suppose that Arcana would actually be the one affiliated to the player, but that's just more work that I refuse to do at this point. As far as I'm concerned, the player character is the full Arcana, and Igor just has it because game purposes, there has to be another character to promote your relationship with, all that jazz. So, anyways, woo! Okay, I know I said that Igor was the last one, but there's two new characters I need to mention that have been introduced into Persona 5 Royal, whom you can form confidants with, being Kasumi Yoshizawa and Dr. Maruki. We'll call these two honorable mentions, I guess. Now, it should be noted that neither of their arcanas, being Faith and Consultant, respectively, are canonical in role or name. Both of them are altered or renamed versions of pre-existing cards that we've already gone over. The two cards they mimic are the Hierophant Arcana, which belongs to Sojiro, and the Magician Arcana, which belongs to Morgana. Since I've already discussed the lore behind both of these cards, I won't be repeating myself here. I'll simply discuss the characters themselves and how they relate to their Confidants cards' origins. So, here we go. Beginning with the Faith Arcana, Kasumi Yoshizawa. Kasumi is a new character that appears as a first-year student to Shujin Academy shortly after you do. Kasumi and her sister Sumire make a promise to be the world's best gymnast, a promise that is short-lived with Sumire dying in a car accident. At least, that's what the game would want you to believe. In reality, Kasumi is the girl who falls victim to the car accident. The girl you meet, who acts as Kasume, is in fact her sister Sumire. Following the death of her sister, Sumire suffers from extreme PTSD. She seeks counsel in Dr. Maruki, who encourages her to take on the identity of her sister. Towards the end of the post-game, Sumire, acting as Kasumi, comes to her senses and accepts reality as Sumire. If I go back and forth between names, just assume I'm talking about the girl who joins your party. While Sumire is not really an important character during the main game, she becomes a central part during the post-game. She is an available party member for the post-game palace only, which is kind of a letdown, in my opinion. But nonetheless, this does mean that she has a persona, Cendrillon. Cendrillon is simply the French adaptation of the infamous Greek folktale Cinderella. So to avoid butchering the French pronunciation, I will be calling her persona Cinderella. Cinderella is the first persona used by a Phantom Thief member or affiliate that is neither a criminal or fictional villain. This can easily symbolize Sumire's absence from the team, given how she doesn't agree with the Phantom Thief's methods. Cinderella's design shows her to be made completely out of glass, symbolizing Sumire's non-existent and artificially empowered self-ego. Cinderella also alludes to Sumire's true identity during her awakening in the main game, when she calls Kasumi useless and refers to her awakening as choosing to live in false glory. Sumire's codename amongst the Phantom Thieves is Violet. While there isn't too deep of a meaning for her alias, Violet is a bluish-purple color that is seen as the opposite spectrum of red, which is of course the primary color that you will see throughout every corner of Persona 5's aesthetic choices. Sometimes the color violet can be used to symbolize the future, the imagination, and dreams, or even the enhancement of one's spiritual or psychic abilities. All of these traits can relate to Sumire's psychosis issues given her case of PTSD. So, how do Sumire and Cinderella relate to the Faith Arcana, aka the Hierophant? I honestly can't really say what the correlation is. The main aspect of the Hierophant was its relation to the Pope and his role of guidance and leadership to the Catholic Church. I suppose that we could look back at Waite's description of the Hierophant Arcana, showing servitude, mercy, and goodness, all of which are traits that Sumire, acting as Kasumi, has. While Kasumi is more energetic, Sumire's true nature is rather shy and timid. In fact, Sumire's story relates rather well to Futaba's now that I think about it. They both blame their family member's death on themselves, and in turn, completely wreck their own cognition. Part of it makes me wonder why her arcana is called Faith, but I feel like it's called that due to not only symbolism within the new songs within Persona 5 Royal, but also within her arc as a character, having faith in herself, and not having faith in other people, stuff like that. But yeah, Kasumi / Sumire, everyone. Please clap. Now we have Dr. Maruki, the Consultant Arcana. So, Dr. Maruki appears as a counselor that the school hires to look good after Kamoshida, the school's old volleyball coach, admits to numerous physical abuse and sexual assault crimes. Maruki is all around just a great guy. If you spend time with him, you'll learn that he genuinely cares about each and every student and wants them to be as safe as possible. Maruki also possesses a great interest in cognitive science, which was the same subject that Futaba's mother's life work was all about. Maruki wanted to do his research to help his fiancée, Rumi, who was struck with a severe case of PTSD after a burglary incident. During this time, Maruki prematurely awakens to his persona and uses it to help heal Rumi at the cost of her forgetting who he is. He also uses his powers at this point to alter Sumire's cognition to make herself think that she is Kasumi. Again, I need to stress this, he is a genuine and overall good person and good guy. If you don't believe me with my summary, then just play the game. All in all, with direct help from you, leader of the Phantom Thieves, Maruki is able to finish his research. Conveniently enough, Maruki attempts to get his research officialized by his old colleague professor around the same time that Yadabaoth, the antagonist of the main game, merges reality with the metaverse. This allows Maruki to make direct contact with his persona, Azathoth, thus truly awakening to it. Maruki now possesses the ability to alter reality due to Azathoth's unique abilities founded in Yaldabaoth's attempted merge. However, Lavinza and Morgana explain later that Maruki's reality-bending abilities truly come from society's wishes and desires for him to lead them. Whereas society had subconscious faith in Yaldabaoth, the next person or group of persons in line for society to cling to would be the Phantom Thieves. However, it is the Phantom Thieves themselves who looked towards Maruki in their time of personal troubles. Because of this, Maruki was given such tremendous power. With this power, Maruki creates a reality in which everyone gets what they wished for. Morgana becomes human. Futaba's mother is alive. Shiho is out of her coma. Akechi is alive. And more. Everything seems good under Maruki's world. However, because none of it is truly real, you and the Phantom Thieves band together again with Akechi and Sumire at your side to defy Maruki's reality. None of you all will stand to live under a reality that is not only falsified, but is that completely under control of someone else. Maruki's persona, as previously stated, is Azathoth. Azathoth is a deity in Chulu mythos and dream cycle stories of H.P. Lovecraft. The story behind Azathoth's origin is really hilarious, as it originated as a name that Lovecraft would write a small note about in regards to its hideous name, and he would later make it into a full-fledged idea. The story behind Azathoth is that it is a supreme and cruel godlike creature in an eternal slumber, and whose dreams of all of existence resides in. It is said that if Azathoth wakes up from its slumber, existence and reality will instantly crumble. Azathoth's relation to psychology and reality clearly parallel with Maruki's role as the Councillor and his want to change reality for the betterment of society. Regardless of his good intentions, the Phantom Thieves inevitably tear down Maruki's falsified reality. As pointed out in my review of Persona 5 Royal, the entire base game of Persona 5 is about breaking free from the constraints of society. Because of this, it would make sense that the final boss would be a form of God, given how only a divine-like entity would be in control of society's livelihood. In this struggle, the Phantom Thieves represent free will in a world that is predestined by not only God, but by what society claims you as also. However, in Persona 5 Royal, we see another interesting take on this topic. Maruki steps in wanting to help everyone he can with all this power to make the world a world of goodness and without evil or hurt. Even with good intentions, the Phantom Thieves still stop him. Absolutely incredible narrative. Love it. All the songs of Royal relate to this idea, I believe. Throw Away Your Mask. Oh, it is beautiful. It is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So, how does Maruki and Azathoth relate to the Councillor Arcana, aka the Magician? Well, as I described near the beginning of this video, the Magician acts as a unit which connects the natural and the supernatural. Maruki successfully merges reality with his palace in the metaverse. Of course, because Maruki's reality is falsified, it can also relate to the sleight of hand gig that the Magician portrays. Maruki's reality is fake. It is literally too good to be true, and it always will be that good so long as he wills it. Anyways, guys, there's my 2 cents about every single available Confidant within Persona 5 and how they relate to their assigned major arcanas. I hope I was able to shed some light on any potential philosophical elements within all the symbolism, given the fact that there was just so much. If you feel like I left something out, please let me know in the comments below. Throughout this video, I mentioned quite a number of different people or sources that helped me for this video. Due to time constraints, I won't be able to mention or include everybody, but a list of them can be found in the description below, so please do yourself a favor, check them out, and yeah. So actually, one last thing before I go. is I know that this video is going to be quite lengthy, so to make up for it, well, I guess if you've actually made it this far in the video, it doesn't matter. But I'm going to say this anyways. If you just want to look at specific parts of this video where I talk about a specific confidant, I will make a unlisted playlist for you to watch, as well as timestamps in the description below, so you can either just skip to that part in this video, or you can watch part of the unlisted playlist where I have each individual part posted. So, yeah, guys, again, thanks for watching. This is Jake, logging out. Peace.